I was bent double in agony as my water broke all over my parents' imported Persian rug. Instead of helping, my mother sneered, telling me to stop trying to ruin my brother's big night with my unwed pregnancy drama. My father told me to call a cab because my fluid would ruin his Porsche. I walked out into the rain alone. 2 weeks later, my mother knocked on my penthouse door demanding to see her grandchild. I just looked at her and asked what baby. I am Cassidy, 32 years old, and my family threw me out when I was in labor because they thought I was a jobless failure. They had no idea the child I was carrying belonged to a billionaire couple or that I was the one pulling the strings of their financial ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who quietly built an empire. The dining room of my parents' Seattle mansion was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of expensive catered food and the toxic cloud of their boundless vanity. The crystal chandelier cast a harsh light over the mahogany table where my family had gathered to worship their favorite subject, my 35-year-old brother Cameron. I sat at the far end of the table, heavily pregnant, my hands resting on my 9-month belly, trying to ignore the dull ache that had been building in my lower back all afternoon. Cameron stood at the head of the table, swirling a glass of vintage champagne, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. He was holding court, loudly bragging about his tech startup. He claimed he was on the verge of securing a massive angel investment that would catapult his failing company into the stratosphere. I knew for a fact that his company was bleeding money, drowning in debt, and barely keeping the lights on. But my parents, Brenda and Richard, swallowed every lie he fed them. They looked at him with such absolute adoration, the kind of look they had never once directed at me. To them, Cameron was the golden child, the brilliant entrepreneur who was destined to bring glory to the family name. I was the dark stain on their perfect suburban image. They thought I was a jobless, directionless mess who had gotten knocked up by some deadbeat who ran off. They thought I was living off their scraps. I never corrected them. I had learned long ago that their ignorance was my greatest weapon. Just as Cameron raised his glass for a toast to his own imaginary brilliance, a sharp, tearing pain ripped through my abdomen. It was not like the dull aches I had felt earlier. This was a sudden, violent contraction that stole the breath right out of my lungs. I gasped, dropping my fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china, drawing the irritated eyes of everyone at the table. Before I could even apologize, a warm gush of fluid rushed down my legs, soaking through my maternity dress and pooling directly onto my mother's prized Persian rug. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white, as another wave of agonizing pain hit me. "Look what you have done," my mother shrieked, jumping up from her chair, not to help me but to inspect the damp spot on the rug. Brenda glared at me with absolute disgust, her face twisting into a mask of pure contempt. "I am sorry," I managed to choke out through clenched teeth. "I think the baby is coming. My water just broke." "You just could not stand it, could you?" Brenda snapped, throwing her linen napkin onto the table. "Cameron is finally getting the recognition he deserves. He is about to become a millionaire. And you have to pull a stunt like this to make it all about you. You are unbelievable, Cassidy. You are a stain on this family. You show up here a jobless, unwed mother abandoned by whatever loser got you pregnant, and now you want to ruin your brother's night of triumph." I stared at her, the physical pain of the contraction momentarily eclipsed by the sheer cruelty of her words. I was going into labor. I was having a medical emergency in her dining room, and her first instinct was to accuse me of seeking attention. "Dad," I gasped, looking past my screaming mother to where my father sat. The pain was intensifying, wrapping around my waist like an iron band. "I cannot drive like this. The contractions are too close together. Please, I need you to take me to the hospital." Richard slowly set his champagne flute down. He looked at the puddle on the floor, then at my soaked dress, and his lip curled in disgust. "Call an Uber, Cassidy," he said coldly. I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Dad, please, I am in labor. I cannot wait for a rideshare." I said, "Call a cab." Richard repeated, his voice dangerously low. Do you have any idea how much my Porsche costs? You are dripping wet. You will ruin the custom leather seats. I am not destroying my car because you failed to plan your life properly. Besides, we are busy. We are celebrating your brother's future. I am not leaving this house. The sheer inhumanity of the moment hung heavy in the air. My own parents were refusing to take me to the hospital while I was giving birth, all because of a rug, a car, and a fake tech investment. Are you people insane? A sharp voice cut through the dining room. Nia Cameron's wife stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Nia was a brilliant 33-year-old media director. As a Black American woman who had fought tooth and nail for her own success, she had always seen right through my family's pretentious, racist, and classist microaggressions. She was the only person in this house with an ounce of empathy, and she was absolutely furious. "She is in labor," Richard Nia yelled, grabbing her purse from the back of her chair. "Your daughter is giving birth. If you are too obsessed with your stupid car to help her, I will take her myself. Come on, Cassidy. Let us get you out of here." Cameron grabbed his wife's arm, his face flushing red. "Nia, sit down. You are embarrassing me. Let her deal with her own mess. We are celebrating my company." Nia ripped her arm away from his grasp, glaring at him with a mixture of pity and rage. "You are pathetic, Cameron. All of you are pathetic." She took a step toward me, reaching out to help me stand, but I caught her hand. I squeezed her fingers tightly, fighting through another massive contraction. I looked into Nia's eyes and gave her a very subtle, deliberate wink. I shook my head a fraction of an inch, signaling her to stop. I needed Nia to stay here. I needed her inside this house. Over the past 3 years, Nia and I had formed a secret alliance. We both knew Cameron was driving his business into the ground, and we both knew my parents were foolish enough to go down with his sinking ship. I needed Nia to stay behind and listen to exactly what financial ruin they were planning next. "No, Nia," I breathed out, forcing myself to stand up on my own shaking legs. "Stay. Enjoy the celebration. Dad is right. I will just call a car. I do not want to ruin the leather." Nia understood immediately. She backed down, her eyes flashing with silent solidarity, while my parents smirked at what they perceived as my submission. I turned my back on my blood relatives. I did not ask for a towel. I did not ask for a glass of water. I pulled out my phone, requested a premium rideshare, and walked out the front door into the freezing, torrential Seattle rain. The cold hit me like a wall, but the physical agony of labor was nothing compared to the icy resolve settling over my heart. They thought I was a broke, pathetic loser. They thought I was going to some overcrowded public clinic to beg for charity care. They had no idea who I really was. The black SUV pulled up to the curb 5 minutes later. The driver took one look at me standing in the pouring rain, holding my belly, and leaped out to help me into the back seat. He scrambled to grab towels from his trunk, apologizing profusely while asking which hospital emergency room to speed toward. "Take me to Seattle General," I told him, gritting my teeth through another wave of pain. "But do not go to the main entrance. Take the private entrance on the west wing, the VIP pavilion." The driver looked confused, but followed my instructions, weaving through the slick city streets as fast as safely possible. I was not some jobless dropout. I was a private wealth manager handling portfolios for the elite. I had spent the last 3 years building a massive financial empire entirely under the radar. And the baby I was carrying was not the result of a tragic mistake with a deadbeat ex. When the SUV pulled up to the heavily guarded private gates of the VIP pavilion, the driver hesitated, warning me that this entrance was usually restricted. But the moment the security guards saw my face through the rain-streaked window, they immediately raised the barricade. They had been expecting me. The car stopped under the grand illuminated awning. The glass doors slid open, and a team of top-tier medical professionals rushed out with a wheelchair, wrapping me in warm blankets and moving with absolute precision. And standing right behind the doctors, looking frantic, terrified, and overwhelmingly joyful, were Harrison and Olivia Cole. Harrison, a billionaire real estate mogul in a bespoke suit, was practically shaking. Olivia, his elegant and brilliant wife, was openly sobbing as she ran toward me, grabbing my hand and pressing it to her tear-soaked cheek. "You made it," Cassidy Olivia cried, walking alongside my wheelchair, as the nurses rushed us down the pristine marble-floored corridor. "Oh my God, you are so brave. We are right here. We are right here with you." I squeezed her hand back, finally allowing myself to breathe. This was my real family tonight. Harrison and Olivia were not just my biggest clients, they were my closest friends. After 5 years of heartbreaking infertility struggles, they had asked me to do the most profound thing one human could do for another. I was their surrogate. The child fighting to enter the world was the sole heir to the Cole billionaire real estate empire, and as the doctors wheeled me into a luxury birthing suite that looked more like a five-star hotel penthouse than a hospital room, I smiled through the pain. My parents had kicked me out into the rain to protect a car seat, completely blind to the fact that their discarded daughter was about to deliver a billionaire's legacy. And soon I would be the one holding the deeds to their entire lives. The transition from the freezing torrential Seattle rain to the sterile, opulent warmth of the VIP birthing suite was jarring. The medical staff moved with the kind of hushed, synchronized efficiency reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. There were no harsh fluorescent lights blinding me, no crowded triage waiting areas, and absolutely no judgment. Instead, the suite was bathed in soft, warm, amber lighting. Classical music played faintly from hidden surround sound speakers. The air smelled faintly of lavender and clinical sanitation. Dr. Thorne, the most sought-after obstetrician in the state, stood at the foot of the bed with a calm, reassuring smile. Olivia Cole stood by my right side, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she wiped the sweat from my forehead with a cool, damp cloth. Harrison Cole stood on my left, a man who routinely commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar real estate acquisitions, now looking completely helpless as he fed me ice chips. They were terrified, exhilarated, and hovering over me with the kind of fierce protective love that my own parents had never bothered to show me in my entire 32 years of life. "Breathe, Cassidy. You are doing perfectly," Olivia whispered, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Just focus on my voice. You are so strong. We are right here. We are—" Another massive contraction ripped through my abdomen, forcing a sharp cry from my lungs. I gripped the side rails of the custom birthing bed, bearing down against the pain. As the monitor beeped rhythmically in the background, my mind flashed back to how this exact arrangement came to be. My parents thought I was a pathetic, unwed woman who had gotten knocked up by a deadbeat. They had spent the last 9 months sneering at my expanding waistline, using my pregnancy as the ultimate proof that I was the family failure. They had absolutely no idea that I had not had a romantic relationship in over 2 years. They had no idea that the child I was currently laboring to deliver shared 0% of my DNA. 3 years ago, I was just starting my private wealth management firm. I had broken away from a massive corporate bank to strike out on my own, gambling everything I had on my financial instincts. Harrison and Olivia Cole were my very first independent clients. They took a massive risk by handing over a significant portion of their liquid assets for me to manage. I tripled their initial investment within 18 months. Through intense financial planning, late-night strategy meetings, and shared victories, they transitioned from being my most lucrative clients to my closest friends. They became the supportive, fiercely loyal, chosen family that my biological relatives completely failed to be. But despite their billions, despite their sprawling estates and global influence, Harrison and Olivia were fighting a private, devastating war. For 5 years, they had endured the grueling, heartbreak-filled nightmare of severe infertility. I had held Olivia while she cried over negative pregnancy tests. I had sat in their living room while Harrison poured stiff drinks, his usual unshakable demeanor crumbling after top specialists informed them that Olivia's uterus simply could not carry a child to term. They had viable embryos created through IVF, but they had no safe harbor to bring their child into the world. That was the night I made the offer. I looked at the two people who had championed my career, who had treated me with more respect and genuine care than my own mother and father, and I volunteered to be their gestational surrogate. At first, they flatly refused, terrified of imposing such a monumental physical burden on me, but I am nothing if not relentless. I laid out the logic. I was young, healthy, and I had the flexibility to manage my firm while pregnant. More importantly, I loved them and I wanted them to have the family they so desperately deserved. When Harrison finally agreed, he reverted to his ruthless business instincts to ensure I was protected. He refused to let this be a simple favor between friends. He insisted on a legally binding ironclad surrogacy contract drafted by a team of elite family law attorneys. He wanted me compensated for my physical sacrifice, my time, and the inevitable disruption to my life. The financial terms we agreed upon were staggering. Upon confirming the successful implantation of the embryo, Harrison authorized a direct wire transfer of $2 million into my private offshore accounts. But the cash was merely a token gesture compared to the real compensation. Harrison handed me a leather-bound portfolio containing a finalized legal transfer of 15% equity in the Cole Investment Group. That 15% equity was a golden ticket. It made me a silent partner in one of the most aggressive real estate and investment conglomerates on the West Coast. The quarterly dividends alone were enough to make me independently wealthy for the rest of my life. But I did not just sit on that money. I used that massive, untraceable influx of capital to build a web of shell companies. And through those shell companies, I quietly began buying up the debt of my brother Cameron's failing tech startup. My parents thought Cameron was a genius on the verge of greatness. They had no idea I was literally the one holding the leash to his entire financial existence. "Cassidy, it is time," Dr. Thorne announced, pulling my mind back to the sterile warmth of the delivery room. "You are fully dilated. On the next contraction, I need you to give me a deep breath and push with everything you have." I nodded, gripping Olivia's hand so tightly I was sure I was cutting off her circulation. She did not pull away. Harrison moved to support my shoulders. The pain surged again, a towering wave that consumed my entire body. I channeled every ounce of fury from the dining room earlier that evening. I channeled the rage of my father telling me to call a cab because my amniotic fluid would ruin his car seats. I channeled the disgust on my mother's face when she called me a stain on the family. I used all of their toxic, arrogant cruelty as fuel. I took a massive breath, tucked my chin to my chest, and pushed. "One more time, Cassidy. You are doing brilliantly." Dr. Thorne encouraged, his voice remaining perfectly calm and measured. "The head is out. Give me one strong, sustained push for the shoulders." I closed my eyes, bearing down with a primal, exhausting effort. The intense pressure suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound, hollow sense of physical relief. A split second later, the sharp, beautiful, piercing cry of a newborn filled the VIP suite. I collapsed back onto the pillows, gasping for air, my entire body trembling from the exertion. "He is perfect," Dr. Thorne announced. I opened my eyes just in time to see the pediatric nurses swooping in. They performed a rapid, highly coordinated assessment under the bright, warming lights. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a strong, healthy set of lungs. The baby boy was vigorously protesting his sudden entry into the cold world. Harrison stood, frozen tears streaming freely down his face, completely ruining his stoic billionaire facade. He cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands. The lead nurse expertly wiped the baby down, wrapped him tightly in a heated, soft white blanket, and walked straight past my bed. She placed the crying newborn directly into Olivia's waiting arms. I watched as Olivia sank into the armchair beside my bed, cradling her son against her chest. She buried her face in the top of the baby's head, sobbing with a kind of visceral, earth-shattering joy that made my own chest ache. Harrison dropped to his knees beside his wife, wrapping his long arms around both her and the baby, pressing his forehead against Olivia's shoulder. They were completely absorbed in their miracle, a private universe of 3. I lay on the hospital bed watching them with a profound sense of peace settling over me. There was no maternal longing in my heart. There was no biological connection pulling me toward the infant. I was the vessel, the safe harbor that had successfully weathered the storm, and now the cargo was safely home. My job was done. Olivia looked up from her son, her face flushed and streaked with tears. She reached out with one hand, resting it gently on my knee. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the baby's soft cooing. "You gave us our world, Cassidy. You are my sister. You are family forever." Harrison looked at me, nodding in silent, overwhelming agreement. The loyalty in his eyes was absolute. I smiled back at them, letting the sheer exhaustion pull me down into the soft mattress. My biological parents had thrown me out into the rain, viewing me as a worthless liability. They had chosen a failing, arrogant son over a daughter in medical distress. But as the nurses bustled around me, ensuring I was comfortable and recovering safely, I knew the truth. I had just delivered the heir to a billionaire dynasty, cemented a lifelong alliance with the most powerful family in the city, and secured the exact financial leverage I needed to completely destroy the people who had abandoned me. The physical pain of labor was fading, replaced by the cold, calculating realization that the endgame had officially begun. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my recovery suite, casting a warm glow over the pristine white linens of my hospital bed. Less than 12 hours had passed since I delivered the coal heir. My body ached with the profound soreness of labor, a heavy, dull throb that radiated through my core. But my mind had never been sharper. I adjusted the mechanical bed to a seated position, poured myself a glass of iced lemon water from the crystal pitcher on the nightstand, and reached for my laptop. While my physical body was recovering, my financial machinery was shifting into high gear. I opened the encrypted portal to my primary holding company. The dashboard loaded, displaying a string of account balances that would have made my father drop dead from a heart attack. For 3 long years, I had played the role of the tragic, directionless daughter perfectly. I let my mother roll her eyes at my cheap maternity clothes. I let my father lecture me about personal responsibility during every agonizing family holiday. I swallowed their insults, their pity, and their thinly veiled disgust, using their utter lack of interest in my actual life as the ultimate smokescreen. They thought I spent my days crying in a cramped apartment over a fictional ex-boyfriend. In reality, I spent 18 hours a day analyzing market trends, aggressively managing elite portfolios, and leveraging my initial successes into massive institutional growth. The $2 million Harrison Cole wired me upon my successful pregnancy was just gasoline poured onto an already raging fire. I had funneled that capital into high-yield commercial real estate trusts and aggressive tech shorts, multiplying the principal effortlessly. Now it was time to cash in my chips and secure the final piece of my empire. I opened a secure document sent over by my lead attorney just moments ago. It was the final acquisition contract for Apex Financial Partners, a highly respected boutique wealth management firm in downtown Seattle. The current partners were retiring, and they had been quietly looking for a buyer who possessed both the ruthless aggression to grow their client list and the liquid capital to buy them out in cash. I possessed both. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, verifying the asset transfers, the employee retention clauses, and the transfer of their lucrative commercial debt portfolios. My parents always worshipped the executives at firms like Apex, treating them like financial gods. They would practically bow to the ground whenever a senior partner walked into their country club. They had absolutely no clue that the daughter they kicked out into the rain last night was about to become the sole owner and chief executive officer of that exact firm. With a steady hand, I typed my digital signature at the bottom of the contract. I clicked the submit button. A green checkmark flashed across the screen. The wire transfer initiated, automatically sending a massive 8-figure sum from my offshore holdings directly into the escrow account. It was done. I was officially the head of a financial empire. I closed the laptop, a cold smile touching my lips. Right on cue, my encrypted secondary phone vibrated against the mattress. I picked it up, unlocking the screen to find a message from Nia. My sister-in-law was the only person who knew I was not the helpless victim my family painted me to be, though even she did not know the sheer magnitude of my current net worth. She was my inside operative, trapped in the suffocating echo chamber of my parents' mansion. I opened the text. The message was brief, frantic, and dripping with disbelief. Mom and Dad just decided to remortgage the house to funnel money into Cameron's company. They are blinded by delusion. He showed them some fabricated projection charts this morning, and they ate it up. They are literally signing the paperwork with the bank tomorrow. Cassidy, they are going to lose everything. I stared at the glowing text on my screen, reading the words over and over again, until the sheer brilliance of the situation washed over me. I threw my head back against the hospital pillows and laughed. It was a genuine chest-shaking laugh that pulled uncomfortably at my sore muscles, but I could not stop. My parents were actually going to do it. They were going to leverage their most prized possession, their pristine multi-million-dollar Seattle mansion, the very house they had thrown me out of because my amniotic fluid might stain a rug. They were going to hand over the deed to the bank just to inject cash into Cameron's failing tech startup. I knew Cameron's company was a burning ship. I had seen his actual financial disclosures months ago through my industry contacts. His flagship software was a glitchy mess, his turnover rate was catastrophic, and his so-called angel investors had all quietly backed out after conducting their due diligence. Cameron was desperate. He was bleeding cash and running out of time before the board ousted him. Instead of admitting failure, he had chosen to bleed our parents dry, feeding their vanity with fake spreadsheets and promises of a glorious initial public offering that would never happen. And my parents, completely blinded by their obsession with having a successful golden boy son, were willingly walking right off the cliff. I picked up my phone and drafted a quick reply to Nia. Let them sign it. Do not interfere. Keep playing the supportive wife. I have everything under control. I hit send, then immediately picked up my primary phone and dialed my newly acquired chief operating officer at Apex Financial Partners. He answered on the first ring, his tone sharp and deferential to his new boss. Good morning, Cassidy, he said. The acquisition paperwork just cleared escrow. Congratulations. We are fully operational under your command. Thank you, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I need you to execute an immediate directive. My parents, Richard and Brenda Vance, are applying for a massive secondary mortgage on their residential property in Mercer Island. They are routing the loan through Pacific Standard Bank. I want you to step in. There was a brief pause on the line as Marcus processed the command. You want us to intercept the loan application? No, I said smoothly. I want you to let Pacific Standard Bank approve and issue the loan. Then I want Apex Financial Partners to immediately purchase that specific debt portfolio from the bank at a premium. Buy the mortgage, buy the commercial loans tied to Cameron Vance's tech startup. I want our firm holding every single piece of paper with my family's signature on it. I could hear the realization dawning on Marcus's end of the line. You want to be their sole creditor. Exactly, I confirmed, staring out the window at the gray Seattle skyline. Within 6 months, my brother's company is going to default on its obligations. When that happens, the corporate loans will collapse, and the secondary mortgage on my parents' house will be triggered for immediate collection. When they inevitably fail to make that balloon payment, I do not want them dealing with some faceless banking executive. I want them dealing with me. Consider it done, Marcus said, his voice carrying a mix of professional awe and subtle fear. We will acquire the debt portfolios by the end of the business week. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bedside table. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the absolute certainty of my victory settle deep into my bones. My parents had spent my entire adult life calling me a disappointment. They had built their entire identities around their sprawling mansion, their luxury cars, and their imaginary superiority. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could discard me into the freezing rain and simply return to their expensive champagne entirely free of consequences. They were about to learn a brutal lesson in high finance. They had freely chosen to hand over the keys to their entire kingdom to my brother. And now, I was going to buy the ground out from under his feet. I would let them live in their comfortable, arrogant delusion for just a little while longer. I would let them spend the loan money. I would let them boast to their country club friends about Cameron's fake success. And then when the time was perfectly right, I was going to foreclose on their entire lives. The first 48 hours after my discharge from the hospital set the tone for the rest of my recovery. Harrison and Olivia personally ensured my transition back home was flawless. They arranged for a discreet private ambulance to transport me from the VIP pavilion directly to the secure underground garage of my downtown penthouse. A specialized maternity recovery nurse was hired to monitor my vitals for the first week, and a private chef arrived daily to prepare nutrient-dense meals designed to accelerate my healing. Olivia checked in on me multiple times a day, sending me hundreds of pictures of the newborn baby boy settling into his sprawling nursery. I was surrounded by absolute luxury, treated with the utmost reverence by the people who actually valued my existence. Yet as I sat on my velvet sofa looking out over the panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, a small, stubborn part of my brain kept waiting for my phone to ring. It was a pathetic, lingering, childish instinct. I placed my primary phone on the glass coffee table and simply stared at the blank screen. Day 1 passed. Not a single text message. Day 3 arrived. No missed calls. By the time a full week had gone by, the absolute silence from my biological family became deafening. They had watched me collapse in agony in their dining room. They had watched my amniotic fluids soak into their rug. They had kicked me out into a freezing rainstorm while I was in active labor. And for 14 consecutive days, neither Brenda nor Richard bothered to check if I had survived the night. Cameron never sent a sarcastic text. They did not know which hospital I had gone to. They did not know if I had endured emergency surgery. They did not know if the baby had lived or died. They simply did not care. They had erased me from their minds the moment I walked out their front door, treating my medical emergency as nothing more than a minor inconvenience that had temporarily interrupted their celebration. Any microscopic shred of guilt I might have felt about my impending financial retaliation evaporated into thin air. Their 14 days of absolute silence was the final confirmation I needed. I owed them no loyalty. I owed them no mercy. They had dug their own graves, and I was going to gladly hand them the headstones. While my body healed in the comfort of my penthouse, my mind was entirely focused on the mechanics of their destruction. I spent my days in my home office coordinating with my executive team through encrypted video calls. Buying my parents' debt directly under my own name or my primary firm's name would tip them off too early. Cameron was arrogant, but he was not completely illiterate when it came to corporate structures. If he saw my wealth management firm listed as his new creditor, he would immediately run crying to Brenda and Richard, and they might attempt to find a legal loophole before the trap was fully sprung. I needed a ghost ship. I directed my legal team to establish a blind shell company registered in Delaware, entirely insulated by multiple layers of corporate anonymity. We named it Obsidian Holdings. On paper, Obsidian Holdings appeared to be a faceless mid-tier private equity firm specializing in acquiring distressed assets. In reality, I was the sole shareholder, the only board member, and the absolute dictator of its capital. With Obsidian Holdings fully operational, I authorized the systematic acquisition of my family's financial obligations. Pacific Standard Bank was more than happy to offload the risk. We purchased the secondary mortgage on my parents' Mercer Island mansion at a slight premium, effectively making me the sole owner of the roof over their heads. But I did not stop there. I instructed my team to buy up every single outstanding line of credit attached to Cameron's tech startup. We bought his equipment leases, we bought his vendor debt, we bought the corporate credit cards he had been maxing out to pay for his lavish networking dinners. Within 10 days, Obsidian Holdings held the leash to every single dollar my family owed. Naya kept me updated on their delusions from the inside. She communicated with me strictly through a secure messaging app, ensuring Cameron never saw her screen. Her updates were a fascinating study in unchecked arrogance. They popped champagne again last night, Nia wrote on the 12th day of my recovery. Cameron told them a massive East Coast equity firm called Obsidian just bought out his local debt. He actually spun it as a victory. He told your father that Obsidian buying the debt means institutional investors believe in his vision and are preparing to back his upcoming public offering. Your dad was so proud he practically cried. I read the message while sipping my morning tea, shaking my head at the sheer magnitude of my brother's stupidity. He was bleeding cash, his product was failing, and his debt had just been swallowed by a predatory holding company. Any competent chief executive officer would recognize an aggressive corporate takeover tactic. But Cameron was so blinded by his own ego that he convinced himself he was being courted by Wall Street. He was literally celebrating the arrival of his own executioner. "And they still have not mentioned you," Nia added in a second message. "Not once." Brenda complained about the cost of cleaning the dining room rug yesterday, but that was it. "It is like you never existed to them." I typed my reply with steady fingers. Good. Let them enjoy their peace. It is about to end. By the 14th day, my physical recovery was nearly complete. Dr. Thorne cleared me for normal activities, noting my rapid progress. The physical ache of childbirth had faded, replaced by a surge of vibrant, ruthless energy. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master bedroom, dressed in a sharp, tailored designer suit. The woman looking back at me was not the broken, dismissed daughter who had begged for a ride to the hospital. She was a titan. I walked into my home office and opened my laptop. The financial trap was fully set. The legal documents were locked in my vault. The debt portfolios were aggressively ticking toward their first major payment deadlines. But a silent takeover was not enough. My family thrived on public perception. They lived and died by their social status, their country club reputation, and the carefully curated image of their immense success. Destroying them privately would not deliver the justice they deserved. I needed to destroy their narrative. I needed the world to know exactly who was pulling the strings. I drafted an email to a senior financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal, a contact I had cultivated over years of managing elite wealth portfolios. I had promised him an exclusive scoop regarding the Cole Investment Group, a story that would send ripples through the entire West Coast financial sector. I attached a carefully curated press release detailing Harrison Cole's latest strategic move. The release outlined the massive transfer of corporate equity, explicitly naming the previously anonymous advisor who had secured the billionaire's legacy. I hit send. The 14 days of terrifying silence were over. The storm I had been brewing in the dark was about to hit the front pages, and my family was standing right in its path, completely devoid of shelter. The notification chimed on my secure tablet precisely at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Wall Street Journal does not deal in gossip, which made the headline sitting at the top of their digital front page all the more devastatingly credible. It read in bold, uncompromising text, "Billionaire Harrison Cole secures legacy, secret surrogate rewarded with 15% stake in Cole Investment Group." The article was a masterpiece of financial journalism. My contact at the paper had executed my instructions flawlessly. The piece detailed how Harrison and Olivia Cole, after years of private fertility struggles, had finally welcomed a healthy baby boy. But it was the financial structuring of the arrangement that had the global markets buzzing. The article broke down the unprecedented wealth transfer, explaining how Harrison Cole had bypassed traditional compensation methods and instead legally transferred a massive 15% equity share of his entire real estate and investment conglomerate to the woman who carried his heir. While the article protected my anonymity by withholding my legal name, it dropped a trail of breadcrumbs designed specifically for one very particular audience. The journalist described the surrogate not as a desperate woman in need of cash, but as a prominent, highly successful private wealth manager operating out of Seattle. It mentioned that this anonymous financial strategist already managed a portion of the Cole family portfolio and had orchestrated the equity transfer as a brilliant expansion of her own independent empire. Most importantly, the article confirmed the exact date of birth, noting that the Cole heir had been delivered precisely 14 days ago in a highly secured total lockdown event at the VIP pavilion of Seattle General Hospital. Sitting in my penthouse, I took a slow sip of my black coffee and watched the financial news networks scramble to cover the story. My phone began to vibrate constantly, with alerts, emails, and calls from industry insiders desperately trying to uncover the identity of Seattle's newest billionaire power player. I ignored all of them. My attention was focused entirely on the secure messaging app connecting me to Nia. Miles away in my parents' sprawling suburban mansion, the morning was unfolding exactly as I had orchestrated. Nia was texting me live updates from beneath the edge of the mahogany dining table, the very same table where my water had broken 2 weeks prior. According to Nia, the mood in the Vance house was euphoric. My parents, Richard and Brenda, were sipping premium espresso and congratulating themselves on their financial genius. They had officially signed the secondary mortgage documents with the bank the previous afternoon. The funds had been cleared, and they were already transferring the massive influx of cash directly into Cameron's sinking tech startup. Cameron was sitting at the head of the table wearing a cashmere sweater purchased on a maxed-out credit card, acting like the conquering hero. He was scrolling through the financial news on his tablet, looking for updates on the tech sector. He wanted to see if anyone was talking about his company, convinced that his new debt holders, the mysterious Obsidian Holdings, were about to make him famous. Instead, he found the Harrison Cole exclusive. "He is reading it right now," Nia texted me. "He just scoffed and told your dad that Harrison Cole must be losing his mind to give away 15% of his company." I smiled at the screen, visualizing my arrogant brother's face. "Read it to them, Cameron," I whispered to the empty penthouse. "Read every single word." Back in the dining room, Cameron leaned back in his chair and began summarizing the article aloud to my parents. He spoke with the dripping condescension of a man who believed he was the smartest person in the room. He mocked the idea of a billionaire handing over a massive slice of his empire to a surrogate. "Can you believe this guy?" Cameron laughed, tossing his tablet onto the table. "Harrison Cole just handed over billions in equity to the woman who rented out her uterus. The board members are probably having simultaneous heart attacks." Brenda sighed, stirring a sugar cube into her coffee. "Some women have all the luck, getting pregnant and scoring a billionaire's fortune without having to work a day in her life. Imagine being that manipulative. She is not just some random woman." Cameron noted, his brow furrowing as he scrolled further down the article. "The journal says she is a private wealth manager here in Seattle. Apparently, she handles their portfolios. It says she structured the deal herself." Richard looked up from his newspaper, mildly interested. "A wealth manager. That is an aggressive play. Do they name her?" "No, they are keeping her identity sealed for privacy," Cameron said, his eyes scanning the paragraphs. "But it says the baby was born exactly 14 days ago. It was a massive security operation at Seattle General Hospital. They apparently shut down the entire VIP pavilion for the delivery." Silence descended over the dining room. Nia texted me a single sentence. "You could hear a pin drop in this room right now." Cameron stopped scrolling. His finger hovered over the screen. He read the sentence again. 14 days ago, Seattle General Hospital." His eyes slowly lifted from the tablet. He looked down at the floor, staring directly at the spot on the Persian rug that was still faintly discolored from professional chemical cleaning. 14 days ago, Cameron muttered, his voice suddenly losing all of its arrogant bravado. "What is it?" Brenda asked, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her mouth. 14 days ago, Cameron repeated, his breathing picking up pace. "It was a Tuesday. It was the night we were celebrating my angel investment. It was raining." Richard frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption to his morning peace. "Yes, it was raining. What does the weather have to do with Harrison Cole?" Cameron looked at his father, his face draining of all color. A sickening, icy realization began to claw its way up his throat. He remembered Cassidy standing at the end of this very table, bent over in agony. He remembered her water breaking on the rug. He remembered his father telling her to call a cab because her fluid would ruin his Porsche. And most terrifyingly, he remembered the exact words Cassidy had spoken to her rideshare driver as she walked out the front door into the freezing rain. She told the driver to take her to Seattle General. Cameron whispered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. She specifically told him to go to the private entrance, the VIP pavilion. Brenda froze. "Do not be ridiculous, Cameron. Cassidy is a jobless failure. The father of her baby is some deadbeat she met at a bar. She is probably living in a motel right now. She is a private wealth manager." Cameron shot back, his volume rising as the absolute horror of the situation crashed down on him. "She works in finance, Mom. She has been managing portfolios for years. She went into labor exactly 14 days ago. She went to the exact hospital mentioned in this article." Richard slammed his hands on the table. "You are out of your mind. You are telling me that your sister, the woman we kicked out of this house, is the secret billionaire benefactor." Cameron grabbed his hair, his eyes wide with sheer unadulterated panic. He looked at his parents, the two people who had just mortgaged their entire lives, and handed him the cash that had been immediately swallowed by a mysterious holding company. It was not a deadbeat's baby. Cameron choked out the reality of their catastrophic mistake, finally shattering his delusion. The baby was not a mistake. Cassidy's child is the Cole heir. The silence that followed Cameron's realization was thick, suffocating, and absolute. Richard stared at his son, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. Brenda gripped the edge of the mahogany table so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. Before either of them could formulate a coherent sentence, Cameron's phone shattered the quiet. It was a harsh, shrill ringtone. Cameron looked at the caller ID and the last remaining drop of blood drained from his face. It was his chief financial officer. With trembling fingers, he put the call on speaker and set the phone on the table. The voice on the other end was frantic. "Cameron, it is over. The Angel Investment Group was a complete phantom. They never wired the funds. Worse, the moment the cash from your parents' mortgage hit our accounts this morning, our new debt holders seized it. Obsidian Holdings triggered a default clause. They swept the accounts. We cannot even make payroll. The company is effectively bankrupt and Obsidian is moving to liquidate everything." Cameron slumped back in his chair, utterly paralyzed. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, pressing her hands over her mouth. Richard stood up, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. "What do you mean they swept the accounts?" Richard roared at the phone. "That was my money. I just mortgaged my house for that cash." The CFO sounded on the verge of tears. "It is gone, Mr. Vance. All of it. Obsidian holds the commercial debt, and they cross-collateralized it with the personal guarantees you signed. They own the company, and they basically own your house now." The call disconnected, leaving a dial tone echoing in the lavish, doomed dining room. The reality of their situation crashed down on them with the force of a freight train. In less than 24 hours, they had gone from celebrating a fabricated tech empire to standing on the absolute precipice of total financial ruin. They were going to lose the mansion. They were going to lose their country club memberships, their luxury cars, and their pristine social standing. They were destitute. Nia watched from her seat, keeping her face carefully blank while her thumb rapidly typed every word into her secure chat with me. Then something truly grotesque happened. I watched it unfold in real time through Nia's detailed messages. Brenda slowly lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes darted from the disconnected phone to the tablet displaying the Wall Street Journal article. The terror of impending poverty vanished instantly, replaced by a ravenous, blinding greed. Her posture straightened. The panicked trembling stopped. She looked at Richard, and a twisted, desperate smile stretched across her face. "The baby." Brenda breathed out, her voice vibrating with a sudden manic energy. "Richard, do you not see Cassidy has the baby?" Richard looked confused for a fraction of a second before the same greedy realization washed over his features. They had absolutely no understanding of how legal surrogacy worked. In their minds, a woman who gave birth was the mother, end of story. They assumed I had kept the child, or at the very least that I possessed undeniable legal leverage over the billionaire. They thought I was sitting in some apartment holding Harrison Cole's flesh and blood hostage, possessing the ultimate biological bargaining chip. She is the mother of a billionaire's heir. Brenda paced the room, her mind spinning a rapid delusional narrative. Harrison Cole is worth billions. He would pay anything to secure custody or to keep a scandal out of the press. Cassidy could demand $10 million in child support today, and he would write the check without blinking. Cameron sprang up from his chair, his previous despair completely erased by this new golden lifeline. $10 million is exactly what I need to buy back the debt from Obsidian Holdings, he said, his voice frantic with excitement. Mom is right. Cassidy is sitting on a gold mine. She is his mother. The courts always side with the mother. Cole will have to pay her a fortune in maintenance housing and hush money. "We need to find her," Richard commanded, already pacing toward the hallway to grab his coat. "We are her family. She is going to need her parents to help negotiate this. She cannot handle billionaires on her own. She needs our guidance to make sure she gets the maximum payout." Brenda was already nodding enthusiastically, completely rewriting history to suit her immediate needs. Exactly. She was just hormonal and stressed when she left here. We were practicing tough love. She is going to be so overwhelmed with a newborn. We will go to her, bring her home, and I will help her raise the child right here in this house. Cole can pay for the nursery renovations. Nia sat at the table, utterly repulsed by the display. She pulled out her phone and sent me a rapid-fire sequence of texts. They are completely unhinged, Cassidy. They think you are hoarding a baby for ransom. They think you can extort Harrison Cole for child support to save Cameron's company. They are entirely ignorant of your surrogacy contract. They are planning to track you down and play the loving, supportive grandparents to get their hands on Cole's money. I sat in my penthouse reading Nia's messages while enjoying a fresh croissant prepared by my private chef. The sheer audacity of my family was breathtaking. They threw me out into a freezing storm because my amniotic fluid was an inconvenience. Now that they were bankrupt, and now that they believed I held the key to a billionaire's vault, they were ready to welcome me back with open arms. They wanted to use a child they thought was mine as a tool for extortion. I typed a response to Nia. Let them strategize. Let them build their castles in the sky. Where do they think I am? Nia replied instantly. Cameron is trying to track your phone. They are pulling your old credit card statements to see where you might be renting. They think you are hiding in some cheap apartment, overwhelmed and desperate for their help. I chuckled, setting my coffee cup down on the glass table. My parents were about to embark on a desperate manhunt for a vulnerable, unwed mother who did not exist, and a baby I did not have. They were marching eagerly toward a battlefield where I held every single weapon, every single deed, and every single ounce of power. Let them search, I texted back. When they finally figure out where I live, make sure you are with them. You will not want to miss the look on their faces when I open the door. The manic energy in the dining room shifted from frantic panic to calculated predatory greed. Cameron paced the length of the mahogany table, his mind working in overdrive as he constructed a reality that suited his desperate needs. He paused near the head of the table, slamming his hands flat against the polished wood. Listen to me, Cameron commanded, his eyes darting between our parents. We have the ultimate leverage. We just need to play this smart. Cassidy has always been weak. She has always craved our approval. Right now, she is sitting in some cramped, cheap rental, completely overwhelmed by a screaming newborn. She is vulnerable, and she needs her family. We are going to give her exactly what she wants. Brenda leaned forward, completely captivated by the delusion. Yes, Cameron is right. She was just acting out before because she was scared. We will go to her. I will play the doting grandmother. We will bring her back to this house and show her that we forgive her for her dramatic exit. Once she trusts us again, we take control of the narrative. Cameron continued, a sickening grin spreading across his face. Think about it from a public relations standpoint. Harrison Cole is a billionaire with an immaculate corporate reputation. He cannot afford a messy, highly publicized paternity scandal. He cannot afford the media digging into a secret love child he abandoned with a jobless woman. The moment we step in as Cassidy's legal advocates, we threaten a massive custody lawsuit. We threaten to drag his name through the mud on every financial news network in the country. Richard nodded slowly, rubbing his chin as he processed the vile strategy. He will want to settle out of court quietly. Exactly. Cameron snapped his fingers, pointing at our father. Cole will want a non-disclosure agreement signed immediately. We will step in as her representatives and negotiate the terms. We demand a massive lump sum maintenance payment to guarantee her silence and secure the child's future. $10 million. It is pocket change to a guy like Harrison Cole, but it is exactly what I need to pay off Obsidian Holdings and revive my company. We save the house, we save the business, and Cassidy gets to live comfortably under our roof. Everybody wins. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the plan hung in the air. They were actively plotting to use an infant as a bargaining chip to extort a billionaire, all while pretending to be a loving, supportive family. They had completely convinced themselves that this psychotic fever dream was a brilliant, foolproof business strategy. Nia could not take it anymore. She had sat quietly through the initial shock, texting me their reactions, but this level of grotesque hypocrisy was too much for her to swallow in silence. Nia pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She stood up, looking at the three of them with a mixture of absolute disgust and disbelief. "Are you people completely out of your minds?" Nia asked, her voice sharp and ringing with authority. "Have you all suffered a collective psychological break?" Cameron glared at his wife. "Nia, sit down. You do not understand high-level negotiations." "High-level negotiations." Nia laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that cut through the room. "You are talking about blackmail, Cameron. You are talking about extorting a billionaire. And worse, you are talking about using your own sister as bait after treating her like garbage." Brenda stood up, her face flushing with indignation. "Do not speak to your husband that way, Nia. We are trying to protect this family. We are trying to protect Cassidy from being taken advantage of by a rich man." "Protect her?" Nia echoed, her voice rising in volume. 14 days ago, you told her she was a stain on this family. 14 days ago, you kicked a woman in active labor out into a freezing rainstorm because Richard did not want amniotic fluid on his leather car seats. You forced her to order a rideshare while she was doubled over in agony. And now, because you found out the baby is tied to a billionaire, you want to waltz into her life and play the loving, protective grandparents. You are sick. All of you are absolutely sick. Richard stepped forward, his face dark with warning. "You are stepping out of line, Nia. This is family business." "I am your family," Nia shot back, standing her ground against my father. "And as your family, I am telling you that this plan is psychotic. Cassidy is not going to just hand over a baby to you. She is not going to let you negotiate anything on her behalf. She walked out that door and she did not look back. You think she is going to forgive you just because you show up with fake smiles and empty apologies?" "She is my sister," Cameron yelled, his temper finally snapping. "She has to listen to me. She is broke, she is alone, and she has no idea how the real world works. She needs us." "She does not need you, Cameron. She survived without you," Nia retorted, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "And if you try to pull this extortion scheme, Harrison Cole's lawyers will crush you. You think a billionaire does not have sharks on retainer? They will bury you so deep under legal fees you will never see daylight again. You are already bankrupt. Do not turn yourselves into criminals, too." The dining room fell into a tense, explosive silence. Nia stood tall, chest heaving, having finally unleashed the truth they were all desperately trying to ignore. But my family was completely immune to logic. Their greed had entirely eclipsed their sanity. Brenda marched around the table, stopping inches from Nia's face. "Listen to me very carefully," Brenda hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You married into this family, but you do not dictate how we operate. We practice tough love when it is necessary, and we come together when it counts. Cassidy is my daughter. She will do what is best for her family. If you cannot support your husband when his entire livelihood is on the line, then you can pack your bags and get out of my house." Richard crossed his arms, standing firmly beside his wife. "We are moving forward with the plan. We find Cassidy, we secure the child, and we open negotiations with Cole. If you try to interfere, Nia, I will personally ensure you walk away from this marriage with absolutely nothing." Cameron did not defend his wife. He did not step between Nia and his parents. He simply looked at her with cold, arrogant expectation. "Get in line, Nia. We have work to do." Nia looked at the three of them, realizing in that exact moment that there was no reasoning with monsters. They were so deeply entrenched in their own narcissism that they would gladly burn the entire world down just to keep their hands warm. Arguing with them was a waste of breath. But more importantly, arguing with them would blow her cover. She needed to stay on the inside. She needed to know their exact movements so she could feed the intelligence directly to me. Nia took a slow, deep breath, forcing her racing heart to calm. She lowered her gaze, masking the absolute contempt burning in her eyes. She let her shoulders drop, feigning submission. "Fine," Nia said quietly, keeping her tone completely flat. "Do whatever you want. I will not stand in your way." "Good," Brenda sneered, turning away as if dismissing a disobedient servant. Now Cameron pull up her old credit card statements. We need to find out where she is renting. Nia retreated to her chair, sitting silently, as the three of them clustered around a laptop, feverishly plotting their extortion scheme. Beneath the table, out of their line of sight, her fingers flew across her phone screen. She drafted a massive detailed message outlining every single sick, twisted detail of their plan. She hit send, firing the message directly to my encrypted device. They thought they were the hunters preparing to corner a wounded, desperate prey. They had no idea they were blindly marching straight into a slaughterhouse, and I was waiting for them with the doors wide open. It was 2 in the morning when the sprawling Vance mansion finally plunged into complete silence. Nia lay perfectly still in the master bedroom, listening to the heavy, rhythmic breathing of her husband. Cameron was dead to the world, exhausted from a day of spinning manic delusions and plotting corporate extortion. Nia waited another full 15 minutes to be absolutely certain he was in a deep sleep. Then she threw back the silk duvet, slipped out of bed, and moved silently down the darkened hallway toward Cameron's home office. She knew exactly what she was looking for, and she knew exactly how to get it. Cameron was a man governed by massive ego and staggering carelessness. He believed himself to be a tech visionary, but his password security was a joke. He used his own birth date and the founding year of his worthless company for almost everything. Nia eased the heavy oak door shut behind her and woke up his primary desktop computer. The screen illuminated her face with a harsh blue glow. She typed in the passcode. Access granted. Nia pulled a high-capacity encrypted flash drive from the pocket of her robe and plugged it into the terminal. She did not just want snippets of information. She wanted the entire financial anatomy of Cameron's fraudulent empire. She navigated straight to the hidden folders on his local drive, bypassing the sanitized presentations he showed to his parents and investors. What she found was staggering. It was not just poor corporate mismanagement. It was textbook federal wire fraud. Nia opened spreadsheets that exposed the absolute rot at the core of the business. Cameron had deliberately falsified quarterly revenue projections to secure massive lines of credit. There were forged bank statements, doctored accounts, receivable ledgers, and a damning trail of emails proving that the so-called Angel Investment Group was a complete phantom. He had known for months that no institutional money was coming, yet he willfully fabricated financial documents to convince Richard and Brenda to sign away the equity on their home. He had knowingly led his own parents to the slaughter just to keep his CEO title for a few more weeks. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, dragging and dropping gigabytes of toxic corporate data onto the flash drive. She copied the fake projection charts, the internal communications admitting to insolvency, and the offshore transfer receipts where Cameron had desperately tried to hide what little cash remained. While the data transferred, Nia moved to the locked filing cabinet in the corner of the office. She knew where he kept the physical backup key hidden beneath a decorative paperweight. She unlocked the heavy steel drawer and pulled out the hard copy folders containing the secondary mortgage documents his parents had just signed. She used her phone to scan every single page in high resolution, ensuring she captured all the legal signatures and bank stamps. This was the kill shot. The evidence she was compiling was enough to trigger an immediate SEC investigation and send Cameron to federal prison for a decade. A small, fleeting wave of adrenaline washed over her, but there was no guilt. None. Nia was a fiercely intelligent, successful woman who had spent years being talked down to by her racist, classist in-laws while watching her husband bleed his family dry. She was done playing the supportive wife to a narcissistic fraud. She was done suffocating in this toxic house. The progress bar on the computer screen hit 100%. The transfer was complete. Nia safely ejected the flash drive, wiped the computer's recent access history, and put the physical machine to sleep. She restored the filing cabinet to its exact previous state. Leaving no trace behind, she slipped out of the office, bypassed the main living areas, and walked out into the attached climate-controlled garage. The heavy concrete walls and thick insulation of the garage provided the perfect soundproof bunker. Nia climbed into the driver's seat of her car, locked the doors, and pulled out her encrypted secondary phone. She uploaded the massive data dump directly to a secure cloud server, authorizing immediate access for Cassidy's email address. The moment the upload confirmed, Nia dialed Cassidy's private number. Cassidy answered on the very first ring. Her voice was sharp, alert, and entirely devoid of sleep. "You got it?" Cassidy asked. "I got everything," Nia breathed out, leaning her head against the leather steering wheel. "I just sent you the entire digital autopsy of his company. It is worse than we thought, Cassidy. He did not just make bad investments, he committed federal fraud. He forged bank statements to get your parents to sign that secondary mortgage. He knew the angel investors were fake the entire time. I gave you the ledgers, the internal emails, the fake projections. You hold the smoking gun to his entire life." I can hear the click of Cassidy's keyboard through the speaker as she opened the files in her penthouse. "Good," Cassidy said, her tone dripping with icy satisfaction. "My legal team will have a field day with this. When the Securities and Exchange Commission gets a hold of these doctored statements, Cameron will not just lose the company, he will be facing severe criminal charges." Nia let out a long, shaky exhale. "They are coming to find you tomorrow morning, Cassidy. They spent the last 2 hours going through your old bank statements and tracking the IP addresses on your previous email logins. They managed to pinpoint the high-rise building where your penthouse is located, although they still think it is a cheap rental apartment complex." "Let them search," Cassidy replied smoothly. "You need to understand their exact angle," Nia warned, gripping the phone tightly. "They are fully delusional. They think you kept the baby. They want to claim grandparent rights to force their way into your life, and then they plan to use the child to extort Harrison Cole for $10 million. Cameron literally wants to hold a billionaire hostage to pay off his corporate debt. They are planning to show up at your door, play the loving family, and sell out the baby the moment they get their hands on it." A low, dark chuckle echoed through the phone line. Cassidy was not intimidated. She was highly amused. "Grandparent rights," Cassidy repeated, rolling the absurd concept around in her mouth. "Extorting a billionaire. It is almost poetic how utterly disconnected from reality they are. They threw me out because they thought I was a liability, and now they want to use a child they have never met as a lottery ticket. They are bringing baby clothes to use as props," Nia added, shaking her head at the sheer insanity of the people she lived with. "Brenda is practicing her concerned grandmother face. They are fully committed to this performance." Cassidy paused for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the terrifying, absolute authority of a woman who held every single string in her hands. "Let them come," Cassidy said softly. "Let them march right up to my front door. I want them to walk into the lobby. I want them to ride the elevator up. I want them to stand there with their cheap props and their pathetic extortion schemes. I have a surprise ready for them, Nia. By the time they leave my building, they will not have a company, they will not have a house, and they will realize they never had a baby to begin with." Nia smiled in the dark garage, a genuine, unrestrained smile. "What do you need me to do?" "Pack your bags," Cassidy commanded. "Pack everything you actually care about. Tomorrow morning when they leave to come find me, you walk out of that house, and you do not look back. I will have my private security team waiting for you a block away to ensure you leave safely. You are done playing the dutiful wife, Nia. Tomorrow we burn it all to the ground." "I will be ready," Nia promised. She ended the call, the heavy weight of the past few years finally lifting off her shoulders. She stepped out of the car, walking back into the dark, silent mansion. It was nothing but a tomb now. The Vance family had built their entire identity on a foundation of lies, arrogance, and cruelty. And in just a few short hours, the sun would rise, and that foundation was going to violently shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The sun rose over Mercer Island, casting long shadows across the Vance family mansion. Inside the grand foyer, Richard, Brenda, and Cameron gathered with the frantic, nervous energy of scavengers preparing for a feast. They were entirely fueled by their own toxic delusions, practically vibrating with the anticipation of a massive payout. Cameron clutched a leather portfolio containing his fabricated legal demands for Harrison Cole. Brenda held a crinkled plastic shopping bag from a local discount department store. Inside the bag lay 2 hastily purchased, cheaply made baby onesies. The clearance tags were still attached. They marched out the front door toward Richard's pristine Porsche, completely oblivious to the fact that Nia was quietly slipping out the back door at that exact moment, carrying a single duffel bag toward a waiting black SUV surrounded by private security. Inside the Porsche, the mood was triumphant. Cameron took the wheel, navigating the morning rush hour traffic toward downtown Seattle. He spent the entire drive bragging about how he would negotiate with the billionaire's lawyers, eagerly painting himself as the protective older brother defending his naive, unwed sister. Brenda rehearsed her tears in the passenger seat visor mirror. She practiced the exact pitch of her voice, aiming to sound like a heartbroken but infinitely forgiving mother who only wanted to hold her grandchild. Richard sat in the back seat, mentally spending the $10 million they planned to extort. They all firmly believed Cassidy was cowering in some cramped, subsidized housing unit, desperate for their saving grace and entirely dependent on their guidance. Cameron followed the GPS directions into the heart of the city's financial district. The towering skyscrapers of glass and steel gleamed brilliantly in the morning light. As the robotic voice of the navigation system announced they were approaching their destination, Cameron slowed the car, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He looked around the pristine, tree-lined avenue for a run-down brick building or a cheap walk-up apartment complex. Instead, the GPS directed him to pull into the sweeping, semicircular driveway of the Sovereign. The Sovereign was the most exclusive, fiercely guarded residential high-rise in the entire Pacific Northwest. It was a fortress of modern architecture where tech billionaires, international royalty, and elite athletes resided. The expansive driveway was paved with imported Italian cobblestone. Uniformed valets stood at crisp attention next to a line of customized Ferraris, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces. Richard's Porsche, while considered a status symbol in the suburbs, looked entirely average and unimpressive sitting in this particular lineup. "The GPS must be glitching," Richard snapped, leaning forward from the back seat to glare at the dashboard screen. "There is absolutely no way she lives in a place like this." Cameron checked his encrypted tracking app again, his frown deepening. The IP address trace from her old bank accounts led exactly to this building. Maybe she is squatting in an employee unit on the basement level. Or maybe Cole shoved her in a tiny service apartment on the lower floors to keep her out of the press. Brenda scoffed loudly, adjusting the collar of her designer coat. Obviously, the billionaire is paying her rent to keep her quiet. He probably put her up in a studio here to monitor her. She is probably terrified of getting kicked out the moment he takes the baby. This gives us even more leverage. We can threaten to expose his little hideaway to the media. They handed the keys to a valet who looked entirely unimpressed by Cameron's arrogant, demanding demeanor. The trio marched aggressively through the towering revolving glass doors into a lobby that looked more like a modern art museum than a residential building. Massive slabs of seamless black marble stretched across the floor. A towering, cascading water feature provided a soothing ambient background noise that masked the sounds of the city outside. Behind a sleek obsidian reception desk stood a pair of imposing security concierges wearing tailored suits and discreet earpieces. Cameron marched straight up to the desk, slamming his hand down flat against the marble surface. "We are here to see Cassidy Vance. We are her family. Tell her to let us up immediately." The head concierge, a heavily muscled man who radiated absolute authority, did not flinch or react to the outburst. He slowly typed the name into his secure terminal. He looked up, his expression entirely devoid of emotion. "You are expected. Proceed to elevator bank A. It is pre-programmed for your specific destination." Cameron smirked at his parents, interpreting the swift, unquestioned entry as undeniable proof of Cassidy's desperate need for them. "See?" Cameron whispered loudly as they walked briskly toward the gleaming elevators. "She already warned security we were coming. She knows she is in over her head. She is waiting for us to save her." The sleek, brushed steel elevator doors slid open. There were no buttons inside the cabin, only a biometric scanner and a high-definition digital screen. The moment they stepped inside, the doors closed silently, and the elevator surged upward with a smooth, stomach-dropping speed. They stood in silence, watching the digital floor indicator climb higher and higher. Past the 20th floor, past the 40th floor, past the 60th floor. Cameron's arrogant smirk began to falter slightly. The service apartments and cheap studios were supposed to be on the bottom floors of these luxury buildings. The digital screen flashed the number 75, indicating the absolute top floor of the skyscraper. A moment later, the screen cleared and displayed a single gleaming word: penthouse. The elevator doors chimed with a soft melodic tone and slid open, revealing a private, expansive foyer that was larger than the entire ground floor of the Vance family mansion. The walls were paneled in rich, dark walnut and adorned with original museum-quality contemporary art. A massive cascading crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light across the polished hardwood floors. Brenda gripped her plastic shopping bag of cheap baby clothes tightly, her knuckles turning stark white. The breathtaking contrast between the overwhelming luxury of this private space and the pathetic discount props she was carrying suddenly made her feel very small and entirely out of place. But her blinding greed quickly overrode her brief flash of insecurity. She shook off the hesitation, forcing a sickly sweet, intensely maternal expression onto her face. They stood before a set of towering, custom-forged double doors. Cameron stepped forward, straightening his tie and rolling his shoulders, preparing to play the role of the tough, high-powered executive, ready to negotiate a multi-million-dollar settlement. Richard stood tall right behind him, crossing his arms, ready to lay down the law and assert his patriarchal authority. Brenda moved to the front of the pack, clutching the discount baby onesies against her chest like a protective shield. Cameron raised his hand and aggressively pressed the illuminated brass doorbell. A deep, resonant chime echoed from deep within the massive residence. They waited, their hearts pounding with toxic anticipation, entirely convinced they were about to corner a weeping, broken girl desperately clutching a billionaire's infant. The heavy brass lock clicked sharply. The massive double doors slowly swung open. I stood perfectly framed in the grand entryway of my penthouse. I was not the shattered, exhausted, weeping victim they had so eagerly anticipated. I was wearing a tailored emerald green designer silk loungewear set that draped flawlessly over my recovering yet confident frame. In my right hand, I casually held a Waterford crystal glass filled with a sparkling non-alcoholic vintage. My hair was professionally styled, my posture was uncompromising, and my expression was entirely devoid of the desperation they had banked on. Behind me, the sprawling living area of the penthouse stretched out in immaculate perfection. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, illuminating the custom Italian furniture and the massive modern art installations. There were no scattered baby bottles. There were no frantic maternity nurses. There was no chaos. There was only absolute, pristine, multi-million-dollar tranquility. My family froze. The collective shock hit them like a physical wall. Cameron's mouth hung slightly open as his eyes darted from the emerald silk of my outfit to the breathtaking expanse of the penthouse. This did not fit the narrative he had spun. This was not the subsidized housing unit he had planned to kick the door down on. Richard blinked rapidly, his authoritative stance instantly melting into profound confusion. But Brenda was a creature of sheer, unadulterated greed. The overwhelming display of wealth did not deter her. It activated her deeply ingrained survival instincts. She shoved her confusion aside, plastered on a grotesquely exaggerated smile of maternal devotion, and lunged forward. "Oh, my beloved daughter!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast foyer. She threw her arms out, attempting to pull me into a tight, dramatic embrace. I did not blink. I simply took one precise half-step backward. Brenda grasped at empty air, stumbling slightly in her designer heels before catching her balance. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my crystal glass, raising a single eyebrow at her performance. Brenda recovered instantly, unfazed by my icy reception. She shoved the crinkled plastic shopping bag toward my chest. "I brought you presents," she gasped, forcing actual tears to well up in the corners of her eyes. "I was so worried about you, Cassidy. I have not slept a wink since that terrible night. I was just so scared you were alone. But look at you now. Come bring my billionaire grandson out. I need to hold him. Our family is finally reunited." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the immaculate air. She had not slept a wink. She had spent the last 2 weeks hosting country club dinners and funneling mortgage cash into a fraudulent company. She had thrown me out into a freezing storm, and now she dared to stand in my home and demand access to a child she viewed as nothing more than a winning lottery ticket. Before I could even respond to the sheer lunacy of her performance, Cameron pushed his way past our mother. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert dominance in a room that clearly intimidated him. He looked around the penthouse again, his mind frantically trying to rationalize my living situation. "Look, Cassidy, we saw the news," Cameron said, using his loudest, most commanding boardroom voice. "I know you have been struggling. I know exactly what is going on here. Cole put you up in this place, right? He shoved you in this penthouse to keep you quiet and out of the media. Well, you do not have to be scared anymore. Your big brother is here." I slowly lowered my glass, watching him dig his own grave with profound amusement. "You are out of your depth, Cassidy," Cameron continued, stepping closer, trying to physically loom over me. "Harrison Cole is a ruthless billionaire. Men like him crush vulnerable women like you every single day. But you have family backing you now. I will be the official representative to negotiate with the Coles. I am going to demand the absolute maximum rights for you and the child. You cannot let those rich people take advantage of you. I will draw up the non-disclosure agreements, and I will personally handle the settlement wire transfers." Richard stepped up right beside Cameron, nodding in solemn agreement. "Your brother knows corporate sharks, Cassidy. He runs a major tech company. He knows how to extract capital from arrogant executives. We are going to protect your interests and make sure you get the massive payout you deserve. You are a Vance. We stick together when the stakes are this high." I stood there looking at the three of them. They were a perfect portrait of parasitic greed. They had marched into my home uninvited, carrying discount baby clothes as a pathetic prop, and immediately tried to hijack a non-existent child to fund their bankrupt lives. They truly believed I was a weak, terrified girl, hiding in a gilded cage provided by a rich man. They truly believed they were the saviors who were going to extort a $10 million check from my best friend. I watched Cameron's eyes dart toward the custom marble kitchen island, clearly calculating how much the imported stone cost. He was sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. He was a man drowning in debt, a man whose fake tech company had its accounts swept to zero just hours ago, desperately trying to play the apex predator. He needed this extortion money to survive the week, and the stench of his desperation was practically radiating off his cashmere sweater. And Richard, the man who had prioritized the leather seats of his Porsche over his daughter's medical emergency, was now attempting to play the role of the protective patriarch. He stood there puffing out his chest, completely oblivious to the fact that the very ground he was standing on belonged to the woman he had discarded. Brenda was the worst of them all. The plastic bag in her hands rustled loudly in the quiet foyer. 2 weeks ago, she had called me a stain on the family lineage. Now she was weaponizing the title of grandmother to secure a payday. She thought her fake maternal warmth would erase the cruelty of a lifetime. She thought I was still the little girl desperate for a crumb of her affection. I let my gaze sweep over each of them slowly, deliberately. I made sure to look at Cameron's sweating brow, Richard's trembling hands, and Brenda's fake, strained smile. I wanted them to feel the distinct, terrifying shift in power. I wanted them to realize that the dynamic had permanently changed before I even spoke a single word. The absolute silence in my penthouse seemed to finally unnerve them. There were no sounds of a newborn. No crying, no cooing, no rocking chairs creaking in the background. The environment was utterly pristine and entirely devoid of an infant's presence. Brenda shifted her weight nervously from one designer heel to the other. "Cassidy," she prompted again, her voice losing a fraction of its sugary sweetness. "Stop standing there like a statue. Go get the baby. We have major legal strategies to discuss, and we do not have time to waste." I swirled the sparkling liquid in my crystal glass, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. I looked directly into my mother's greedy, expectant eyes. "What baby?" I asked, my voice perfectly, even barely above a whisper. Brenda's grotesque smile faltered. She craned her neck, trying to peer around my shoulder down the long, sunlit corridor that led to the guest wings of the penthouse. Stop playing games, Cassidy. The newborn. My grandson. The baby you delivered 2 weeks ago. Go get him so we can take some photos and start drafting the legal demands. I took another slow, deliberate swallow of my sparkling drink. The crystal felt cool and heavy against my palm. I will ask you again, I said, my tone remaining entirely conversational. What baby? Richard lost his patience. The thin veneer of the concerned father evaporated in an instant, replaced entirely by the authoritarian bully I had known my entire life. He stepped aggressively toward me, pointing a thick, shaking finger at my face. Do not lie to us. We read the Wall Street Journal this morning. We know everything. We know you gave birth to Harrison Cole's child 14 days ago at the VIP pavilion. We know you are hiding his heir in this apartment. Bring the boy out here right now so Cameron can start negotiating your settlement. I stared at his pointing finger, then looked up into his red, furious face. The sheer, magnificent absurdity of their delusion was simply too much to bear. A low chuckle escaped my throat. I tried to suppress it, but the absolute stupidity of my family was overwhelming. The chuckle grew into a bright, genuine, echoing laugh. I laughed until my ribs ached from the recent delivery. I laughed until tears of pure amusement pricked the corners of my eyes. Cameron clenched his fists, his face contorting with panic and rage. What is so funny? Stop laughing. This is a multi-million-dollar negotiation. Stop acting like a crazy person and bring us the kid. I finally caught my breath, wiping a stray tear of mirth from my cheek. You really have no idea how the real world works, do you, Cameron? I asked, my voice dripping with pure, unadulterated pity. You actually stood in our parents' dining room, hatched a master plan to extort a billionaire, bought clearance rack onesies as props, and marched all the way up to my penthouse without once doing a basic internet search on the laws regarding gestational surrogacy. Brenda frowned, the plastic shopping bag in her hand, suddenly looking very heavy. What are you talking about? You gave birth. You are the mother. The courts always favor the mother. We have all the leverage. I am not the mother, Brenda, I stated, enunciating every single syllable so the reality could finally pierce their thick skulls. I was a legal gestational surrogate. I contributed absolutely zero genetic material to that child. The embryo belonged entirely to Harrison and Olivia Cole. I simply provided the safe harbor for 9 months because Olivia could not carry the pregnancy to term. It was a highly regulated, legally binding medical arrangement between best friends. The color instantly drained from Cameron's face. He took a staggering step backward, bumping hard into the heavy wooden door frame. That beautiful baby boy, I continued, my voice ringing with cold, hard authority, was placed directly into the arms of his biological mother the exact second he entered the world. He left the hospital with Harrison and Olivia 14 days ago. He has been sleeping soundly in the nursery of their private estate ever since. I have zero parental rights. I have zero legal custody. I have absolutely zero leverage over the Cole family. And most importantly, there is no infant in this penthouse for you to use as a bargaining chip. Brenda dropped the plastic shopping bag. It hit the marble floor with a pathetic rustling thud. The cheap baby clothes spilled out, looking utterly ridiculous and sad against the imported stone. No, Cameron gasped, his breathing turning ragged and shallow. No, that cannot be right. The article said he gave you 15% of his entire company. A billionaire does not just hand over billions in equity to an incubator. You have to be holding something over his head. You have to have the kid. He gave me the equity because I am a highly skilled, ruthless private wealth manager who negotiated an ironclad compensation contract for my physical sacrifice, my time, and my expertise. I shot back, stepping forward and forcing Cameron to shrink away from me. It was a business transaction between consenting adults. Harrison rewarded me because I secured his family's legacy, not because I am holding his son hostage for child support like some common criminal. Richard looked completely horrified. His entire extortion fantasy had just evaporated into thin air. There was no baby. There was no custody battle to threaten. There was no $10 million payout coming to save them from their crippling debts. The grand rescue plan they had bet their entire lives on was a ghost. But the money, Richard stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the lavish entryway, as if searching for a hidden vault of cash. Cameron needs $10 million today to save his company and our house. We already signed the secondary mortgage. If you do not have the baby to extort Cole, how are we supposed to get the settlement? You are not getting any settlement, I said, my smile vanishing, instantly replaced by a gaze so intensely cold it made my father physically flinch. You marched into my home intending to traffic an infant for cash. You thought you could use my body and my trauma as a lottery ticket to bail out Cameron's fraudulent tech startup. You are morally bankrupt, and now you are literally bankrupt. Brenda clutched her chest, staggering back against the wall as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The reality was finally sinking in. They had risked everything, mortgaged their sprawling mansion, and handed the cash directly to Cameron, all under the delusion that they could extort a billionaire to cover their losses. And the entire plan was built on a lie they had invented in their own heads. They stood in my foyer, completely destroyed by their own profound ignorance. The silence that filled the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the sound of Cameron's panicked, hyperventilating breaths. They had come to claim a prize that did not exist, and in doing so, they had trapped themselves in a nightmare with no escape route. Cameron's panic morphed back into rabid entitlement within seconds. If there was no infant to hold hostage, his greedy mind instantly pivoted to the only other lifeline available, the financial windfall mentioned in the article. His eyes darted around my lavish penthouse again, processing the sheer cost of the imported marble and custom furniture. "So where is the money?" Cameron demanded, his voice cracking as he took a step toward me, his hands outstretched like a beggar demanding tribute. "The news article said you structured a massive deal. You must have gotten paid millions for being a surrogate. You do not need all of this luxury. Cassidy, hand over that cash right now to save your brother's company." I looked at him, shaking my head in utter disgust. His entire corporate facade was gone, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, entitled fraud. "You want to see the money?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. I turned my back on them and walked unhurriedly toward the massive glass coffee table in the center of my living room. Resting perfectly in the center was a thick black leather portfolio. I picked it up, feeling the satisfying weight of their absolute destruction in my hands. I turned around and tossed the heavy folder directly onto the glass surface. The loud smack echoed sharply across the room, making all three of them jump. "Look closely," I commanded. Cameron scrambled forward like a starving animal, practically falling over the edge of the sofa to rip open the leather portfolio. Richard and Brenda crowded in right behind him, their eyes wide with desperate hunger. Laying right on top was a certified bank statement from my offshore accounts. Cameron stared at the bold, undeniable numbers printed across the page. $2 million in liquid cash, I stated, watching Cameron's eyes bulge as he traced the zeros with his trembling finger. A direct wire transfer from Harrison Cole the moment the pregnancy was confirmed. And right beneath that statement is the finalized, legally binding shareholder agreement. Cameron frantically flipped the page. Richard leaned over his shoulder, his jaw dropping open as his eyes scanned the official corporate seals and Harrison Cole's signature. 15% equity in the Cole Investment Group. I continued, letting the magnitude of the wealth crush them. The quarterly dividends alone generate more revenue than your fake tech startup could ever dream of making in a decade. It is enough capital to buy and sell you 100 times over, Cameron. Brenda let out a small, breathless wheeze. But how she stammered, looking from the documents to my face, her reality completely fracturing. "You have no job. You have no career. You are just a dropout. You could not possibly negotiate a deal like this." "I am not a dropout," I corrected sharply, taking a step toward my mother and forcing her to shrink back. "You simply never bothered to ask what I actually do for a living. You spent 3 years calling me a jobless failure because I refused to work in some corporate cubicle that you could brag about at your pathetic country club. You thought I was a waste of space because I did not marry a man who looked good in a suit." I stood tall, letting them feel the full weight of my authority. "I am a senior private wealth manager. I run my own highly exclusive financial firm. I manage 9-figure portfolios for the absolute elite of this city. Harrison and Olivia Cole were my first independent clients. I tripled their assets in 18 months. I am not some desperate woman they hired out of a catalog. I am their trusted financial strategist, and I am their chosen family. Cameron was still staring at the shareholder agreement, his breathing erratic. $2 million in cash, he muttered to himself, his greedy brain entirely missing the point of my speech. Cassidy, you have to transfer that liquidity to my corporate accounts right now. I have loans defaulting today. You have enough to buy out my entire debt. If you clear my ledgers, I can still save the company. I am your sister. You owe me this. I tilted my head, looking at him with profound, icy amusement. Buy out your debt, I repeated slowly. Cameron, why would I buy out your debt when I already own it? The frantic energy in the room slammed into a brick wall. Cameron froze, his hands hovering over the leather portfolio. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely hollow. Richard stopped breathing. Brenda clutched her designer coat, her face draining of the last remaining drop of color. What did you just say? Richard demanded, his voice entirely stripped of its usual patriarchal thunder. I smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that offered absolutely zero mercy. I gestured toward the bottom of the leather portfolio. Keep reading, Cameron. Look at the last stack of documents. Cameron's hands were shaking violently as he pulled the final stack of thick legal papers from the folder. He stared at the bold block letters printed across the top of the first page. It was a formal notice of debt acquisition. He flipped to the next page. It was a commercial loan transfer. He flipped to the third page. It was a notice of default. He looked at the name of the acquiring company listed on every single document. Obsidian Holdings. Then he looked at the authorizing signature at the bottom of the page. It was my signature. Obsidian Holdings is not an East Coast equity firm, I said, my voice ringing with crystal clear victory. It is a blind shell company registered in Delaware. I am the sole shareholder. I am the sole board member. I am Obsidian Holdings. Cameron dropped the papers as if they had suddenly caught fire. They scattered across the glass table, exposing the undeniable proof of his total financial annihilation. When Harrison Cole wired me that $2 million, I did not just let it sit in a bank. I explained, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from my family. I used that capital to systematically purchase every single line of credit attached to your failing tech startup. I bought your equipment leases. I bought your vendor debt. I bought your maxed-out corporate credit cards. You thought institutional investors were preparing to back your public offering. You are a fool, Cameron. I was simply gathering up all your financial obligations into one place so I could personally crush you. Richard let out a strangled, horrifying sound. He lunged toward the glass table, his hands frantically clawing through the scattered documents until he found the one piece of paper that sealed his own doom. It was the secondary mortgage agreement. No. Richard gasped, his knees buckling slightly as he stared at his own signature on the bank transfer form. No, this cannot be legal. We signed this with Pacific Standard Bank. We gave this money to Cameron, and Pacific Standard Bank immediately sold that debt portfolio directly to me at a premium, I replied, staring down at my father with utter contempt. You were so blinded by your obsession with your golden boy that you willingly handed over the deed to your mansion. You thought you were funding his glorious tech empire. Instead, you handed me the legal right to foreclose on your entire life. Brenda let out a sharp, piercing shriek. She fell against Richard, her perfectly manicured hands clawing at his suit jacket. You own our house, she cried out, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face. Cassidy, you cannot do this. We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me a freezing rainstorm when I was in active labor. I shot back, my voice echoing loudly in the massive penthouse. You gave me constant humiliation. You gave me nothing but disgust and cruelty. You kicked me out to protect the leather seats in a Porsche. And now you are standing in my home begging for mercy from the exact same woman you called a stain on your family line. I stepped right up to the edge of the glass table, leaning forward, resting my hands on the cool surface. I looked directly into Cameron's terrified, tear-filled eyes. You are bankrupt, Cameron, I stated, delivering the final fatal blow to his pathetic ego. Your company is dead. You have no angel investors. You have zero cash. I triggered the default clause this morning. I swept your accounts. I own every single asset you possess. I turned my gaze to Richard and Brenda. They were clinging to each other, looking like two frightened, hollow strangers. And as for you two, I continued, my tone absolute and unforgiving. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. If you are not out of that mansion by the end of the month, I will have the King County Sheriff physically remove you and your belongings from the premises. The majestic, towering silence of the penthouse returned. They had no counterattack. They had no leverage. They had no threats left to make. They had marched into my fortress intending to extort me, and I had just shown them the exact documents proving that I owned the ground beneath their feet. The silence held for exactly 10 seconds before my mother shattered it. Brenda let out a guttural, piercing scream that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the penthouse. She lunged forward, slamming her fists onto the glass coffee table, her face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly desperation. "You ungrateful monster!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are an unfilial, wicked child. Are you trying to drive this family to our deaths? We gave you life. We put a roof over your head, and you plan to leave your own flesh and blood homeless on the street. You are a psychopath." Cameron was hyperventilating now, his hands gripping his hair as the walls closed in around him. "Cassidy, please, you cannot do this. If you foreclose on the house, Mom and Dad have nowhere to go. If you liquidate my company, I am ruined. I will lose everything. Nia will leave me. You have the money. You have the $2 million in cash. Just sign it over. I can fix the ledgers. I can make it right." A sharp click echoed from the far end of the penthouse. The heavy oak door of my private study swung open. The rhythmic, confident clicking of heels sounded against the polished hardwood floor. Everyone turned to look. Nia stepped into the brilliant sunlight of the living room. She looked absolutely breathtaking. She was wearing a razor-sharp crimson pantsuit, her hair immaculately styled, her posture radiating absolute authority. She was no longer the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law they had constantly belittled. She was a woman who had just reclaimed her entire life. Walking right beside her was Mr. Caldwell, my lead corporate litigator, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Cameron stared at his wife, his brain completely short-circuiting. "Nia, what are you doing here? How did you get in here?" Nia did not answer his questions. She marched straight up to Cameron, her eyes blazing with a fierce, uncompromising fire. She stopped inches from his face. She pulled a thick manila folder from her designer tote bag and slammed it directly into his chest. Cameron stumbled back instinctively, catching the folder before the papers could spill across the floor. "What is this?" Cameron choked out, his eyes darting to the bold black text on the top page. "Those are divorce papers," Nia stated, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "I signed them an hour ago. My legal team has already filed for emergency full custody of our assets. I packed my bags the second you and your greedy parents pulled out of the driveway this morning. I am entirely done with you, Cameron. I am done with this toxic, suffocating family." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. "Nia, how could you abandon your husband in his darkest hour? This is when family sticks together." Nia turned her fierce gaze onto my mother, silencing her instantly. "Do not ever use the word family with me again, Brenda. I spent years biting my tongue while you delivered your racist, classist microaggressions. I watched you treat your own daughter like garbage while you worshipped a son who is nothing but a pathetic fraud. I am not abandoning a husband, I am escaping a sinking ship." Cameron frantically flipped through the thick stack of papers Nia had thrown at him. His eyes widened as he saw what was attached behind the divorce filings. There were printed spreadsheets, internal corporate emails, and bank routing numbers. "Where did you get these?" Cameron gasped, his voice barely a whisper. The last remaining shred of his sanity evaporated. "These are my encrypted local drives. These are my hidden ledgers. I got them at 2 in the morning, Nia replied with a cold, triumphant smile. "While you were dreaming about extorting a billionaire, I plugged a flash drive into your home office computer. I downloaded every single piece of fabricated financial data, Every forged bank statement, and every email proving your angel investors were completely fake. I sent the entire digital autopsy of your miserable company directly to Cassidy. Richard staggered backward, clutching the back of the sofa to keep from collapsing. He looked at his son with absolute horror. Fabricated data. Cameron, what is she talking about? What did you do? I stepped forward, taking my place right beside Nia. We stood shoulder to shoulder, an unbreakable wall of retribution. He committed federal wire fraud, Dad, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional, as if I were delivering a routine financial report. Cameron knowingly falsified his quarterly revenue projections. He doctored accounts receivable ledgers to secure massive lines of credit. He lied to you. He lied to the bank. He intentionally presented fake projection charts to convince you to mortgage your home fully, knowing he had absolutely no institutional backing. Cameron dropped to his knees. The papers scattered across the floor around him. He looked up at me, his face wet with tears of pure terror. Cassidy, please. You own the debt. If you keep this quiet, we can just dissolve the company. Nobody has to know. If you expose those files, I will go to federal prison. Please, I am your brother. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man kneeling on my floor. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no remorse, just the satisfying closure of a long overdue balancing of the scales. I am not going to save your company, Cameron, I declared, my voice ringing with finality. And I am certainly not going to cover up your crimes. Mr. Caldwell has already finished formatting your entire data dump. We are not just holding on to these files for leverage. We are officially submitting the entire packet of evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Prosecutor Office by close of business today. Brenda let out a horrific wail, dropping to the floor next to Cameron. She threw her arms around him, rocking back and forth as if trying to shield him from the inevitable. Richard just stood there, staring blankly at the floor, finally realizing that his entire legacy was utterly annihilated. He had bet his home, his wealth, and his reputation on a golden child who turned out to be a criminal. You are a monster, Brenda sobbed, glaring up at me with venomous hatred. You planned all of this just to destroy us. I did not force Cameron to commit fraud, I replied coldly. I did not force you to sign away your house. You did all of that on your own. You dug your own graves because your arrogance blinded you to reality. I walked toward the heavy double doors of the penthouse and pulled them wide open. The hallway beyond was silent and waiting. 14 days ago, you forced me to walk out of your house into a freezing rainstorm while I was doubled over in labor, I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority. You threw me out on the street because my medical emergency was an inconvenience to your upholstery. You discarded me like trash. Now the tables have turned. I am throwing you out of my home. I am throwing you out of my financial ecosystem. And I am throwing you out of my life forever. I gestured toward the open doorway. Get out of my penthouse. Your 30-day eviction countdown on the Mercer Island property officially starts the second you step into that elevator. Naya stood tall, her chin raised high, looking at the weeping ruins of the Vance family with total indifference. Mr. Caldwell remained silent, his presence a towering legal threat that promised absolute destruction if they dared to linger. Slowly, agonizingly, Richard pulled his wife and son up from the marble floor. Cameron was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly as the reality of federal prison loomed over him. Brenda clung to her husband, her face buried in his shoulder, her grotesque performance finally shattered by genuine, irreversible loss. They shuffled toward the door, broken, bankrupt, and utterly defeated. They did not look back. They stepped into the elevator, the steel doors sliding shut, erasing them from my view and sealing their fate. My word was not an idle threat. It was a binding execution order, and the universe was about to collect. The collapse of Cameron's fabricated empire did not happen slowly. It happened with the terrifying, neck-snapping velocity of a guillotine. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the evidence Mr. Caldwell submitted had reached the desk of the federal prosecutor. Less than 2 hours later, a fleet of black government vehicles pulled up to the sleek, rented office space of Cameron's tech startup. Federal agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the letters SEC walked straight past the confused receptionist carrying thick stacks of warrants. They seized hard drives, froze the remaining pitiful bank accounts, and boxed up years of doctored financial records. Cameron was dragged out of his own corner office in handcuffs, his face pale and slick with terrified sweat. Local news cameras, tipped off by an anonymous source, captured every humiliating second of his perp walk. The footage aired on the noon broadcast, showing the golden boy of the Vance family being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. There were no angel investors rushing in with emergency capital. There was no miraculous 11th hour bailout. The company was officially forced into involuntary bankruptcy before the stock market even closed for the day. While Cameron sat in a federal holding cell, desperately trying to secure bail with money he no longer possessed, Nia was executing her own flawless surgical strike in family court. She did not shed a single tear. Armed with her own powerhouse legal team, she filed a devastatingly comprehensive divorce petition. Because she had actively provided the evidence of his criminal fraud, she cleanly severed herself from any liability regarding his commercial debt. When they finally faced each other in the courtroom weeks later, Cameron was a broken, shaking shell of a man facing a decade behind bars. Nia sat with perfect, unbothered posture. The judge took one look at Cameron's documented history of financial deception and granted Nia absolutely everything she asked for. She won full legal and physical custody of their young son. She stripped away exactly 50% of the remaining legitimate untainted assets they shared, leaving Cameron with nothing but mounting legal fees and crippling federal restitution orders. Nia walked out of the courthouse holding her head high, completely free, while Cameron was remanded back into custody. But the true agonizing masterpiece of my retaliation was reserved for Richard and Brenda. I gave them exactly 30 days, not a single second more. I knew my parents better than anyone, and I knew they would spend those 30 days drowning in denial. They truly believed that if they just stalled long enough, I would miraculously soften. They thought blood would ultimately obligate me to show them mercy. They did not pack. They did not hire moving trucks. They simply sat in their sprawling Mercer Island mansion, drinking their expensive wine, waiting for a pardon that was never going to come. On the morning of the 31st day, the King County Sheriff's deputies arrived at their custom-forged iron gates. I did not go in person. I had no desire to dirty my designer shoes on their property. Instead, I sat in my downtown penthouse, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, watching the entire eviction unfold via a secure live feed provided by my private security contractors. Brenda answered the front door wearing a silk morning robe, her face instantly contorting into a mask of outraged disbelief as the uniformed deputies handed her the final foreclosure execution order. The deputies gave them exactly 60 minutes to gather their essential personal belongings. The house legally belonged to Obsidian Holdings now. Every piece of custom Italian furniture, every crystal chandelier, and every piece of imported art they had bought using Cameron's fraudulent loans was seized as collateral. Watching my parents scramble was a study in poetic justice. Richard ran frantically through the marble hallways, desperately tossing clothes into cheap cardboard boxes. Brenda collapsed on the front lawn, weeping hysterically, as the deputies physically escorted her off the property she had built her entire arrogant identity around. They were forced to cram whatever they could carry into the trunk of a battered 20-year-old sedan they had begged a distant relative to let them borrow, as the Porsche had already been repossessed by the bank. With no credit, no liquid cash, and a massive foreclosure permanently branding their financial records, my parents were entirely locked out of the luxury housing market. They had nowhere to go but the very bottom. They were forced to sign a lease on a cramped, poorly insulated two-bedroom rental apartment in a decaying, crime-ridden neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The floors of their new reality were covered in peeling yellow linoleum. The heating system rattled violently in the night. The walls were paper-thin, offering no protection from the harsh, unforgiving sounds of the struggling world outside. Brenda, who had spent decades turning up her nose at anyone who did not wear designer labels, was now forced to haul her groceries up 3 flights of concrete stairs because the building elevator had been broken for years. But the financial ruin was only half the punishment. The ultimate execution was their complete social annihilation. In the fiercely competitive, hyper-judgmental world of Seattle's high society, reputation was the only currency that truly mattered. My parents had spent their entire lives clawing their way into the elite circles, kissing the rings of country club presidents and hosting lavish charity galas just to prove they belonged. Their social death warrant was signed the night Harrison and Olivia Cole hosted an exclusive invite-only charity auction. The ballroom was packed with the wealthiest, most influential power brokers in the Pacific Northwest. During the cocktail hour, Olivia was surrounded by a group of prominent socialites who eagerly asked about her miraculous new baby boy. Olivia smiled, her eyes gleaming with sharp, deliberate intent. She took a delicate sip of her champagne and casually, effortlessly dropped the story. She told the captivated circle of billionaires and power players exactly how her beautiful son came into the world. She told them about the brilliant, fiercely loyal surrogate who had managed their portfolios and carried their heir. And then, with perfect surgical precision, Olivia described how that surrogate's parents had behaved on the night of the delivery. She recounted the story of the Persian rug. She detailed how Richard had refused to let a laboring woman into his Porsche. She painted a vivid, horrifying picture of Brenda kicking her own daughter out into a freezing rainstorm, abandoning her to walk to the emergency room alone, simply because her amniotic fluid was considered an inconvenience. High society thrives on scandal, but it absolutely despises tasteless cruelty. The story spread through the ballroom like a raging wildfire. By midnight, every single influential person in Seattle knew exactly what Richard and Brenda Vance had done. The social excommunication was instantaneous and absolute. A week later, Brenda attempted to attend her regular Tuesday luncheon at the prestigious Emerald Point Country Club, desperately trying to pretend everything was normal. She walked up to the grand mahogany entrance, her chin held high, wearing one of the few designer dresses she had managed to pack. The general manager met her at the front door, flanked by two security guards. He did not offer her a table. He did not offer her a menu. He politely, coldly informed her that the board of directors had unanimously voted to permanently revoke the Vance family membership, effective immediately. When Brenda tried to argue, the other wealthy patrons in the lobby simply turned their backs on her, their faces etched with unapologetic disgust. No one spoke to her. No one defended her. She was escorted off the manicured grounds like a trespasser. Their phones stopped ringing. Their invitations to galas and dinner parties vanished. Former business associates crossed the street to avoid walking past Richard. They were completely, irrevocably exiled from the only world they had ever cared about. They were left to rot in their peeling, noisy apartment, entirely isolated and consumed by the horrifying reality that they had brought this precise nightmare upon themselves. Desperation breeds humiliation. As the harsh winter set in, and the reality of their poverty began to literally freeze them in their poorly heated rental, their pride finally shattered. They realized that I was the only person left on earth with the power and the capital to save them. Sitting in the warmth of my penthouse managing my thriving wealth portfolio, I watched my encrypted phone light up. I had installed a specific filter just to monitor their incoming attempts. The voicemails began piling up. First, it was Richard. His voice was no longer booming or authoritative. It was thin, shaking, and pathetic. "Cassidy, please." Richard begged into the machine, the sound of traffic blaring in the background of his cheap apartment. "Your mother is sick. The dampness in this place is destroying her lungs. We have nothing to eat but canned soup. I know we failed you. I know we were wrong. I will get on my knees and beg you in front of the whole city if that is what you want. Please just send us enough to turn the heat on. Please, daughter." Then came Brenda. The woman who had proudly called me a stain on the family lineage was reduced to ugly, hiccuping sobs. "Cassidy, my baby." Brenda cried, her voice cracking with raw terror. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I was blind. I was foolish. Cameron ruined us, but we are still your parents. You cannot let us die in this place. I will do whatever you want. I will be the mother you always needed. Just pick up the phone. Please pick up the phone." I sat back in my custom leather office chair, listening to their weeping voices fill the quiet elegance of my study. I felt a profound, beautiful emptiness in my chest. There was no anger left. There was no sorrow. There was just the pristine clinical satisfaction of a closed ledger. I picked up the phone. I did not call them back. I did not send a text message. I opened my carrier settings, selected my primary cellular profile, and executed a complete number change. I watched the screen as the old digits were permanently wiped from the network. Their final, desperate tether to my existence was severed with a single tap of my finger. The next time Richard and Brenda dialed that familiar number, praying for their discarded daughter to answer and save them from their freezing, miserable reality, they would be met with nothing but an automated robotic voice echoing through the receiver. The number you have reached has been disconnected. I set the phone down, turned my attention back to the massive glowing monitors displaying the upward trajectory of my empire, and smiled. I had work to do, and that work consumed me in the most magnificent way possible. The next 12 months were a masterclass in ruthless expansion and profound personal healing. I did not just build a company, I forged a kingdom. 1 year later, the Seattle skyline sparkled under a clear, starlit night. I stood on the grand balcony of the newly constructed headquarters of Vanguard Catalyst. This was my crowning achievement, a venture capital fund dedicated exclusively to financing female entrepreneurs. I had taken the exorbitant profits from Obsidian Holdings, liquidated the distressed assets I seized from my brother's fraudulent tech collapse, and poured that capital into a fund designed to elevate brilliant women who were constantly overlooked by the traditional male-dominated financial sector. The grand opening gala was in full swing inside the massive glass-walled event space. It was an assembly of the most powerful, innovative minds on the West Coast. There were no fake projection charts tonight. There were no desperate men begging for secondary mortgages. The room was filled with brilliant female founders, pitching legitimate groundbreaking startups in biotechnology, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence. I took a sip of my sparkling water and turned as the heavy glass doors to the balcony opened. Nia stepped out into the cool night air. She looked absolutely spectacular in a tailored ivory pantsuit, holding a customized clipboard that dictated the precise media schedule for the evening. Nia was no longer just the woman who had helped me burn down the Vance family legacy. She was the official director of public relations for Vanguard Catalyst. After her divorce was finalized, she had taken her settlement, bought a beautiful home for her son in a pristine neighborhood, and stepped into her own unparalleled power. She handled the financial press with terrifying efficiency, curating my public image and ensuring that Vanguard Catalyst became the most talked-about venture fund of the decade. We had forged a bond in the fires of that toxic household, and now we were running the financial district side by side. The Wall Street Journal reporter is waiting in the main lobby for your exclusive interview, Naya announced, her voice vibrating with professional pride. He wants to discuss your decision to fully fund the new pediatric medical device startup. I also just confirmed that our initial funding round has officially been oversubscribed by 40%. I smiled, clinking my crystal glass gently against her clipboard. You are a genius, Nia. You absolutely orchestrated the media coverage tonight. We make a lethal team. Cassidy Nia laughed, her eyes shining with genuine joy. I am just glad I finally get to market a company that actually possesses real capital and a brilliant CEO. Working for you is a distinct upgrade from formatting fake spreadsheets for a man who is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. We shared a look of profound, silent understanding. Cameron's spectacular downfall and my parents' subsequent banishment to the absolute bottom of the socio-economic ladder were distant memories now. They were ghosts, locked outside the impenetrable gates of our new reality. Speaking of VIPs, Nia continued, glancing at the entrance to the ballroom. Your favorite guest just arrived through the private security elevator. You might want to get in there before the press swarms them. I handed my glass to a passing waiter and walked back into the opulent ballroom. The crowd naturally parted, murmuring with respect, as I made my way toward the center of the venue. Standing beneath the magnificent crystal chandelier were Harrison and Olivia Cole. They looked exactly as powerful and radiant as they had the night we finalized my surrogacy contract. But tonight, They were not just billionaire investors attending a gala. They were my chosen family. Resting effortlessly on Harrison's hip, wearing a tiny custom-tailored tuxedo that matched his father's, was a healthy, vibrant one-year-old boy. Little Leo had Harrison's hazel eyes, Olivia's bright, infectious smile, and a quiet, observant demeanor that made everyone around him melt. The moment Leo spotted me walking through the crowd, his face lit up. He kicked his chubby legs against Harrison's side and reached both of his tiny arms out toward me, letting out a loud, joyful squeal. "Look who is here, Leo!" Olivia beamed, her eyes sparkling with tears of absolute happiness as she watched me approach. "It is your godmother." I stepped forward and took the heavy, squirming toddler from Harrison's arms. Leo immediately buried his face in the crook of my neck, his little hands gripping the lapel of my designer blazer. I closed my eyes, breathing in the sweet, clean scent of him. There was no biological imperative pulling me toward him, but there was an overwhelming, fierce, protective love. I was not his mother. I was his fierce, untouchable protector. "You have outdone yourself this time," Cassidy Harrison said, looking around the packed ballroom with deep professional admiration. "I was just speaking with the founders of the solar energy startup you seeded last month. Your portfolio is flawlessly structured. You are officially making my own investment firm look slow." "I learned from the best, Harrison," I replied, shifting Leo comfortably on my hip. "But I prefer to think of it as building a better table rather than just fighting for a seat at the old one." Olivia stepped close, wrapping her arms around me and kissing my cheek. "You built a kingdom, Cassidy, and we are so incredibly proud to stand in it with you." A sharp melodic chime rang through the ballroom as the event coordinator tapped a crystal glass at the main stage. The ambient music faded. The crowd of elite investors, brilliant founders, and high society power brokers turned their attention toward the podium. Nia stood at the microphone, commanding the room with effortless grace. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nia announced, her voice echoing clearly across the venue, "please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Catalyst, Cassidy Vance." The applause was thunderous. It was not polite, obligatory clapping. It was a roar of genuine respect. I handed Leo back to Olivia, gave Harrison a quick nod, and walked up the carpeted steps to the stage. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw brilliant women whose dreams I was financing. I saw Nia standing tall and proud, a survivor who had claimed her own magnificent destiny. I saw Harrison and Olivia holding the beautiful, healthy child that tied our lives together in the most profound way imaginable. I stepped up to the microphone. "They say that blood is thicker than water." I began, my voice steady, carrying absolute authority. "But I have learned that loyalty, respect, and genuine love are thicker than anything else on earth. For a very long time, I believed that I needed to shrink myself to fit into a space that was entirely toxic. I was told that I was a failure because I refused to conform to a hollow, arrogant narrative." I paused, letting my gaze sweep the room. "But I realized that when people refuse to see your worth, you do not beg them for validation. You remove their access to your life, and you build an empire where their opinions hold absolutely zero currency. Vanguard Catalyst is not just an investment fund. It is a declaration of autonomy. We are here to fund the women who have been told to wait their turn. We are here to finance the visionaries who have been discarded. We are here to prove that true power does not come from tearing others down. It comes from having the capital, the intellect, and the sheer ruthless determination to build something magnificent from the ground up." I raised my glass of sparkling water high into the air. "To the family we choose," I toasted, my eyes locking directly with Olivia, Harrison, and Nia. "And to the empires we build with our own two hands." The crowd erupted into a deafening standing ovation. I stood on the stage, bathing in the symphony of success. I thought about the terrified pregnant woman standing in the freezing rain 1 year ago. She was gone. In her place stood a titan. I did not need the toxic bloodline that had tried to destroy me. I had surrounded myself with people who honored my intellect and cherished my loyalty. I had forged my own family, secured my own legacy, and constructed an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power. I was the absolute, undisputed queen of my own reality, and there was not a single person on this earth who could ever drag me back into the dark.